Yes. Okay. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm pleased to welcome everyone on International Roundtable on Organized Crime and Criminal Traditions. So, we are about to start the round panel dedicated to current tendencies in criminalization on the national and transnational levels. I'm Konstantinos Lobodynyuk, and of course, it's an honor to be your moderator on this discussion panel. And let me please introduce our speakers in the order they are given the floor to speak. So, Professor Antonio Nicaso, academician, a best-selling author, internationally recognized expert on organized crime, author of more than 30 books on criminal organization. He is a regular consultant to governments and law enforcement agencies around the world. He teaches at the Queen's University, Italian School of Middlebury College, USA, and St. Jerome's University, Ontario. Oleg Maltsev, an author, criminologist, psychologist, photographer, investigative journalist, academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, founder of Criminalistics Institute and Expeditionary Corps. He is an author of numerous books in the areas such as applied history, sociology, depth psychology, philosophy, criminalistics, and criminology. James Finckenauer, organized crime expert, author, distinguished professor emeritus at Rutgers University, former director of the National Institute of Justice, Washington, D.C. Dr. Finckenauer is an expert in human trafficking, juvenile and international criminal justice, author of numerous books on Russian organized crimes in the US. Don Pinnock, South African writer, investigative journalist, and photographer, author of 17 books about history, politics, the environment, gangs, and science. Don Pinnock is a research fellow at the Center of Criminology, University of Cape Town. Ko-Lin Chin, Chinese-American criminologist who has written extensively on issues related to Chinese crime groups and networks, including Chinatown gangs and tongues, human smuggling organization, organized crime in Taiwan and China, the heroin and methamphetamine business in Myanmar and China, and sex trafficking network in Asia and the United States. And Alexander Sainchin, Doctor of Law, academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, chairman of the Humanitarian Scientific Society. He is a lawyer, the author of many monographs and scientific works in the field of criminalistic. So let me please deliver a few words about the format of this roundtable. As I said, almost all the experts of the given round table know each other in person or at the distance. Thus, it would be great if this meeting turns into a discussion round table. So, since we have two questions and every guest is kindly requested to present their thoughts on them. But in between these two questions, there will be a discussion part. So where you will be able to ask questions to each other. Of course, scholars that specialize in America might be interested to hear what is the current situation on South Italian crimes. So each speaker holds the opportunity to answer two questions formulated and presented to speakers in advance. So please limit the extent of answers up to 8-10 minutes. To begin with, we shall start the discussion on the first subject. Afterwards, each expert will have the opportunity to express his views on the second topic. So the first question on the round table is, what are the current tendencies in criminalization on the national and transnational levels? And I give the floor to Professor Antonio Nicaso. Dear Antonio, please turn on your mic.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you. I will start with a little bit of information about the state of the art in Italy among the major three criminal organizations. Unfortunately, the mafia, the 'Ndrangheta, and the Camorra are doing well despite the pandemic. They have evolved in the age of technology, and mobsters are nothing if not adaptive. I just finished a book about organized crime in the pandemic, and I had access to crime rates and up-to-date statistics from the Ministry of Interior and the Anti-Crime Directorate. And what I can share with you is that in Italy, the three major criminal organizations did not suffer any losses during the first lockdown. All crime against person and property between March the 1st and July the 1st, 2020 increased compared to the same period in 2019. Drug-related offenses have increased by 2.02%. Property-related offenses have also increased substantially, plus 13% for counterfeit product and violation of a trademark, 11% for extortion, 14% of fraud and telematic scams, 4.35% of loan sharking, 8.5% receiving stolen goods, 17% on money laundering, 0.9% about robberies. Crime against the person have also increased with 3.49% in terms of murder and 14% of intended injury. So all crime increased. This gives an idea how they are able to adapt to new situation, able to transform crisis into opportunities. The 'Ndrangheta, for example, is probably one of the most powerful criminal organization in the world. They control drug trafficking in especially cocaine in Europe. They have a ramification all over the world in Australia, in Canada, United States, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, all over the place. What they did, they changed route, narcotic routes. They instead of ship their cocaine to Italy, they use ports in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Belgium. So we saw an increase of seizure of cocaine related to the Italian criminal organization in Spain rather than Italy. But what we saw was that they were able to supply the demand. And we learned in one case that a mobster was arrested while he was hiding 500 kilos of cocaine. And so we had reason to believe that their warehouse were full of cocaine and many other controlled substances during the lockdown. They changed the delivery system. In some city, they use drones. They use cabs. They use social network to reach their clients. And practically this give an idea of how they were able to adapt to this emergency that was unexpected, especially for Italy, with that intensity and practically what we learn was that they were involved in money laundering. They were able to supply not only food, but also they were able to invest money. they try to purchase failing companies. They try to invest money. They try to launder money because they made a lot of money, especially through narcotics, and of course this is what many people are now afraid in the second phase of the pandemic. The idea that they will be able to put their hand on the stimulus funds, they will be able to do what they did during the 2008 global crisis, when they were able to invest a lot of money into the legal market, and they are able to do that because unlike many people perceive about mafia and mafia-like criminal organization, their strain is the ability to create a network of trust. The idea that they are strong, but they are strong not because they are able to bonding people within the organization, but they're strong because they are able to bridge themselves and to connect the underworld to the upper world. And so the level of corruption, the level of networking, it's unbelievable. And in any criminal investigation, police is able to uncover the lawyers, brokers, chartered accountant, politicians, judges, police officers. That's what the mafia is all about. The idea of this alliances, that the strategic alliance that they are able to build, not only in Italy, but in any other place in the world. And that's the strain of criminal organizations such as the Ndrangheta, the ability to corrupt people, to reproduce the same network of trust everywhere, in Europe, in North America, in South America, in Africa, and in Australia and in many other parts. And this is practically the state of the art in terms of Italian criminal organization. They are well connected, but they are able to invest their money mostly outside of Italy. And I'm going to conclude for what I like to call the path of least resistance. In Italy, they are facing the challenge of law enforcement. In Europe, they are not facing the same challenges in terms of fraudulent crime, money laundering, financial crime. They attract attention only when they use violence, but they are using a kind of strategic violence. Their violence is more strategically than practically. They are trying to minimize violence. They try to corrupt people. And that's what they are doing. They are moving in places where there is no anti-mafia legislation, where the legislation is not, is lenient, if we want to put that way. And that's what they are doing. And in those places, they are reproducing the same network of trust that are making them strong and powerful in Italy.
Thank you, dear professor. And I give the floor to Oleg Maltsev, please.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Я вас всех очень рад видеть.
I'm happy to see you all.
И приготовил небольшой анализ того, что происходит в настоящий момент времени в Европе и за ее пределами.
And I have prepared a brief analysis of what is going on currently in Europe and in other places around it.
Да, и у нас абсолютно совпадают взгляды с профессором Никасо, как бы.
And when it comes to this, our visions with Professor Antonio Nicaso, they totally coincide.
Потому что, как он очень верно заметил, криминал обладает на сегодняшний день теми вещами, которые не обладает сегодня никто.
As Professor Antonio rightly noted, currently organized crime possesses those qualities and things that are not accessible to other people, that other people do not have.
То есть они привыкли жить в состоянии вот этого кризиса постоянно.
So this organized criminal organizations, they used to living in this emergency type of situation. So this is something quite natural for them.
То есть любой криминал, по сути своей, это же вещь нелегальная, то есть это подполье.
When, I mean, certainly any criminal activity is something illegal by its nature.
Да, то есть они привыкли находиться в состоянии нелегальности.
So that is what I'm trying to convey, that they are used to living in this illegal pressure type of situation. This is not something new for them.
И для них кризис не является какой-то особенной как бы ситуацией, которая на них как-то влияет.
So henceforth, the crisis is not something extraordinary for them that would impact them drastically in a negative manner.
То есть они боеспособнее на сегодняшний день, чем любые правоохранительные органы, как бы.
So as things, as current state of affairs clearly demonstrates to us, organized crime is even more capable, has more capacity and more power than law enforcement agencies in certain aspects.
И прежде всего психологически.
And in the first place, they are more capable from psychological perspective.
Второе.
Second thing.
У них есть абсолютно беспрепятственная возможность передвигаться по миру, в отличие от нас всех в пандемию.
Second thing that unfortunately makes them more advantageous to us is that during the pandemic, they have total freedom. And I mean, they have an opportunity to move around the world somehow, in contrast to us.
То есть делают они это абсолютно легально.
And they try to manage to do that in a legal manner.
То есть, как заметил профессор Никасо, у них поразительная способность коррумпировать кого угодно.
As Professor Antonio has noted, they have that extraordinary ability to corrupt any kind of officials around the world.
Поэтому у них по 5, 6, 7, 10 паспортов.
That is why they end up having 5-10 different foreign passports.
То есть, а надо будет 20.
And if needed, I'm sure they might even do 20 of them.
И они абсолютно легально перемещаются по миру, что ставит их в особое привилегированное положение перед всеми бизнесменами, которые в мире на сегодняшний день существуют.
So from financial viewpoint, representatives of this crime organizations, they are more privileged than any businessman currently in the world by their ability to move around.
Бизнес, которым они занимаются сегодня, если мы говорим о ндрангете, как бы, да, то есть это как бы бизнес, который из $1 делает там $1000.
And for instance, if we are speaking about organization as Drangheta, currently it's in the position that it is making like $1,000 from $1.
Да, поэтому как бы деньги у них огромные и нелегальные.
So they end up having huge chunks of money that are not legal.
Им не надо платить налоги.
They don't need to pay taxes.
Да, им не нужно как бы кому-то отдавать какую-то часть прибыли.
They don't need to share their profits with any other entity.
И самое главное, им не надо платить зарплату.
And the most important thing is that they don't have to pay the salary.
Да, то есть они никому не платят зарплату. У них все заняты и все получают деньги.
Because everybody in the organization, they are all doing their thing and they don't have to pay the salary. They are doing their own activity and they get money for that.
И давайте посмотрим на то, что происходит в Европе.
And now let's shift our attention to what is going on in Europe.
То есть практически 6 месяцев европейская экономика остановлена.
So practically in the course of 6 months, European economy is stagnant. I mean, it's static. It's not moving anywhere.
В настоящий момент времени в Германии отменен Октоберфест, то есть это праздник знаменитый, как бы, который, как бы, ну, по сути, последний раз даже во время войны не отменялся.
So, for instance, one of the bright examples in Germany, they have canceled Oktoberfest, which is a very major holiday, which was not even canceled during war times.
То есть сегодня как бы Люфтганза несет миллиардные убытки.
And company as Lufthansa is having like
Миллиардные убытки.
billions of losses.
Да. По сути, Бавария понесла миллиардные убытки за 6 месяцев как бы простое как бы всего производства.
In the course of 6 months, Bavaria also lost billions when it comes to manufacturing things.
Думаю, в Италии не лучше.
And I don't think Italy is doing any better.
Совершенно не лучше. Как бы. То есть, по сути, сегодня те, кто занимаются честно как бы бизнесом, они работать не могут.
Basically, people that are used to do the fair business, they cannot work in these conditions.
А криминал работать может спокойно. Они как работали, так и работают.
In contrast to this, criminal is doing the way they are even better.
То есть, по сути своей, раз все стоит, это стоимость активов уменьшается.
And since economies are stagnant, it would mean that the cost of assets are decreasing as well.
То есть, так как активы уменьшаются, они становятся привлекательными для инвестиций.
And thus, they would be more alluring, more attractive to investments.
Да. Но чтобы инвестировать, нужно иметь деньги.
However, in order to invest, you have to have money.
А у них есть деньги.
And they, organized crime, they have that money.
То есть сегодня, по сути, экономически идет захват средств производства Европы криминалом.
So what is happening economically is that basically crime is seizing the property and different other financial means of Europe.
То есть, по сути своей, они сегодня готовы забирать те компании, которые были крайне прибыльными, и они станут крайне прибыльными после пандемии, просто сейчас эти компании на грани банкротства.
And so the companies that are about to go bankrupt, they are being bought by criminal organizations, and certainly after the pandemic, those organizations, those businesses are going to become profitable.
То есть, а по сути своей захват средств производства приведет к реструктуризации рынков.
And consequently, logically, the seizure, the robbing of the market, would lead to the restructurization of the market as a whole.
А изменение конъюнктуры и структуризация рынков приведет к тому, что возникнет угроза захвата власти и изменения общественного и государственного строя.
And the changes that take place in the structure of the market will inevitably bring this threat to the government and to the structure of the society in general.
Еще один очень важный момент, то есть то качество, которым обладают криминал, как бы в отличие от всех других бизнесменов и политиков.
Another important quality that crime unfortunately possesses, which is not seen among businessmen and politics, is the following.
С ним очень легко договариваться.
I mean, people find it very easy to make an agreement with crime.
То есть, если вы там являетесь каким-то официальным политиком, и у вас есть какая-то политическая программа, платформа, или вы бизнесмен, у вас существует какая-то философия.
So, for instance, if there is a politician who has his own politics, has his own agenda and program, or if there is a businessman who has a large organization,
и вам верят люди,
and if those people are trusted by other citizens,
то вы не можете вот так взять и развернуться и отказаться от своих мыслей, идей, как бы от своей жизни и прочее.
In such a case, those two example figures, they cannot change their opinions or their goals in a single second. They cannot just leave everything and say, no, now I will do something else.
А криминалу все равно.
In contrast to those people, I mean, to those examples, criminal is different. It's much more flexible and it doesn't care what it is engaged in.
Им абсолютно все равно, с кем договариваться, с кем решать вопрос.
They don't, I mean, it's not important for them with whom they're going to be working and cooperating and with whom they're going to be leading their activities.
Они, как, знаете, как хамелеон, очень быстро меняют цвет. Как будто.
crime is like a chameleon, the animal that quickly changes its shapes and colors.
В одну минуту. И вообще все равно. Их кроме власти ничего не интересует.
Because they don't care about anything but power.
Да, то есть как бы и каким образом они добьются этой власти, еще большего могущества, их тоже вопрос не сильно беспокоит.
And also they do not really care, they're not selective about the means, about how they will attain that power.
Да, поэтому как бы они могут договариваться с кем угодно.
That is why they can make agreement with anybody.
Вот, например,
Example.
Между Евросоюзом и Россией, например, могут быть напряженные отношения.
So between Russia and European Union, there might be strained relationship.
Но между криминалом России и криминалом Италии нет напряженных отношений никаких.
However, the relationship between, let's say, Italian crime and Russian crime, they are not strained. I mean, they don't have problems.
Они отсутствуют. То есть какая разница, какова политика?
Because they don't care about the politics. I mean, who cares for them?
Да, поэтому они в абсолютно привилегированном положении, а я бы сказал на сегодняшний день в монопольном положении на рынке.
So coming from what I've said, I mean, it seems that they are in a completely privileged position, and I would say even they're in the monopoly position in market.
А монополия ведет к сверхприбыли.
And as we know, monopoly always leads to extreme amount of profits.
И что нам только что продемонстрировал в цифровых показателях великолепно профессор Никасо.
Which was recently demonstrated by statistics and the percentages by Professor Antonio.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Oleg Maltsev. And James Finckenauer, you will be next. So you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again for inviting me. And I recall our discussion back in May. I'm going to take a slightly different bent than probably what you have in mind and what I had in mind not so long ago. An interesting thing is that we met in May, and we talked about the relationship between what was going on with the pandemic and what its impact would be on what we thought it might become on crime and justice issues, and an interesting conversation. That was in about the third week in May, if I recall. A week later, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a black man was killed by the police. And that event and subsequent events of that kind, killings of black men by police, several of them in different cities, unfortunately, this has occurred, has turned upside down in the United States perspectives about justice and law and so on. And for the ever since then, last 4 or 5 months, this has been a priority focus across the board. People that I know, friends, who never talked to me about crime and justice issues, all of a sudden are interested in the police and what the police are doing. And do Black lives matter? Do blue lives matter? Do all lives matter? And what that has done is dug down deep in a very critical sore, if you will, in American society, namely racism, and racism whose history goes back to slavery and the founding of the country. And this phenomenon has raised those issues. So we have, on the one hand, this people who are calling for the abolition of the police, get rid of the police. Then we have a slightly less drastic notion, defund the police. This is a vague notion as to what people mean when they say we should defund the police. Do they mean no funding for police, or do they mean some of the police funding should be shifted to other purposes, which is what most people, I think, mean by this. And by that, they mean mental health issues, drug addiction issues, and so on. And then on the other hand, people are calling for more police, more well-equipped police, bringing in military equipment to arm the police, bringing in federal troops, if you will, and National Guard units using tear gas and various things. So we have this enormous spectrum of disagreement on these sides. And then we have the participants, and they range everywhere from people who are peaceful, protesting, exercising their First Amendment rights to state their views and have their views known and so on the one hand. On the other hand, joining up with them, or joining up with them, we have people coming from outside of those communities who sort of hook on, if you will, like a parasite onto these protesters, and they're agitators. And also part of them are the people who move beyond simple protest and marching and carrying signs and making their voices known. They start fires. They start looting stores. They start shooting at the police. So now they have moved, protest has moved from a vocal expression of view toward the police and what's happening to engaging in what are defined as criminal activities. So you cross a line between what's legitimate and what's clearly illegitimate in terms of what you're going to have in protesting. That's on the left side. Then on the right side of the political spectrum, we have these militia organizations. And I use the term organization loosely because organization implies some kind of formal structure. And some of these groups have little or no formal structure other than that they share a certain common ideology. And what they do is they come into these communities, and we've seen it in cities across the country, Seattle and Portland and Kenosha and Minneapolis and other cities, and cities here in Florida as well. And they come in from outside. They come in with military weapons, AK-47 rifles, and they're often dressed in neo-Nazi outfits, and they're clearly right-wing organizations who claim that they're there to maintain law and order. So now we have this clash between a multi-faced group on one side, the left side, that as I said, extends everywhere from peaceful protest, legitimate exercise of freedom of speech, to arsonists, looters, rioters. And on the other side, we got the law and order people who come in to crack down, and then we got gunfire go back and forth between the two sides, police officers being shot, civilians being shot. This consequence of this has embroiled the country for months now, and has forced people to choose up sides. And that's where the Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter issues tend to come into play. And if I could just give you a personal example of how difficult this topic is, and I'm not suggesting you don't think it's difficult. I belong to a philosophy discussion group, and we get together regularly to take up broad philosophical questions like, is there life after death, and things like that. About 2 months ago, it was proposed that our group should discuss racism and racism in the United States. And the idea of the group, the underpinning of the group is enlightenment. That's why we want to do this. We change our views, we get different people's opinions, we're enlightened by this discussion and so on. This discussion in this group about racism became so contentious, and people became so locked in to their existing perspectives. People started calling people names. They started accusing them of all sorts of things, and it quickly moved from a rational discussion intended to bring about enlightenment to personal attacks. Now, if that can happen in a group who start out just as an intellectual exercise, imagine what happens when you take that same thing to the street. And you got people with agendas and so on who want to exercise that. So we have some serious issues surrounding this, and I don't think anybody knows what the right answers are. I used to work in police training, so I happen to believe that better training of police is one of the things that can be done. But I don't think that that's by any event the sole solution to this problem. The police departments represent the communities that they police. They represent the power structure in those communities. And police departments, if there's a racist power structure in a community, the police represent that racist power structure, and they exercise those powers. And you know, so there's the issues about using less than lethal force. When should the police react with firearms and so on? Should they use chokeholds? All of these controversial things that have come into play. There are people talking about these things that never even realized that police officers use chokeholds on people. And of course, one of the critical dimensions that brought this to light is cell phones. Everybody's got a personal camera, and as soon as something occurs on the street, they are right there with pictures of it. The police can no longer deny this. They see a black man being shot 7 times in the back while he's trying to get into his car. The police can't deny that happened. There it is. You know, up front, people can see this. So this is making it much more difficult to hide these sorts of activities, as unfortunately was too often true in the past. So we are in a real struggle among the other struggles that we have in this country. We got a real struggle as how we're going to deal with this, and what's going to be the resolution, and what are communities, when are communities going to accept, and what are they going to accept in terms of police reforms and so on to deal with these kinds of developments. And I would be very interested to hear what some of you folks think about this and what you see looking at it from where you are. What do you see? How is this being projected elsewhere? And what are people taking away from this? With that, I'll stop.
Thank you, dear Professor Finckenauer. And dear Finckenauer, as I understand this last question, you wish to discuss after the first round of answers, yeah?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You would like to discuss it, okay.
Yes.
But now I give the floor to Don Pinnock, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be back again. As the only representative of Africa, I'm going to drag you south of the equator. And I'm going to look at something that I've been investigating for some time, and that's the very different to what Jim's talking about. This is the impact of the illegal wildlife trade on the destabilization of Africa and on the environment itself. It's hard to estimate the value of crime, but it's been estimated that up to $23 billion changes hands worldwide around the wildlife crime markets. And this is very often run by very sophisticated international, well-organized criminal markets. They don't only deal with wildlife crime, they deal with a whole range of things, including drugs and arms. Now, there are two sides to this problem. One is the impact on the environment. The impact on the environment is phenomenal. Asia's desire for exotic animals and animal products is unfortunately looting Africa. And probably over the next 10 to 15 years, elephants, rhinos, pangolins, tigers, black bears, and many other species will be extinct as a result of this. Now, that's the one side of it, and it's damaging the environment. The other side of that is it's destabilizing many African countries. Poachers, armed organized criminal syndicates, they're outgunning security forces, they're looting villages, they're decimating the animal populations, and their haul is mostly being transported out by Asian agents who bribe officials, undermine the security of national states. And this hunger for ivory mainly is stimulating a massive transnational organized crime system. It's flooding areas with weapons. Most of the poaching weapons now are coming out of Czechoslovakia. I think they're called ZKs. It's a firm in Czechoslovakia. Somehow they're ending up in Africa. And there's mounting tension in the states in which this happens. This poaching is happening. Now there's probably almost four main areas where it's happening. One, the killing fields really are, they are West Africa, the Congo Basin, East Africa, and it's starting to move south into South Africa. Now, these ivory, why is this happening? It's not just because local people want money and they're using poaching, and that happens, of course. That's one of the problems. But the real issue and the real problem is that ivory and rhino horn poaching, pangolin poaching, is being used by militias to extend war situations all over the continent. These are things like the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, the Janjaweed, the Sudanese Janjaweed are extraordinary. They, as you know, they were the problems in Darfur. They are coming south now on ivory raids into Chad, into Cameroon, the Central African Republic, into Congo. And you've got now Al-Shabaab operating in Kenya. They're starting to operate in northern Mozambique. They are poaching, or they are setting off poaching chains in order to get arms to fund their military operations. Poaching is also taking place. The National Army in Congo, the FARDC, is one of the major poachers. And in Congo alone, or Equatorial Africa really, in the last, probably in the last 100 years, there were 3 million elephants. There are very few now. The ivory flows are decimating elephants. What the amount of money that the increase in the value is something like 4,000% from the guy who hunts the rhino or hunts the elephant or even catches the pangolin to its final sale. So huge amounts of money are being made. And increasingly, organizations like the Triads are moving deeper and deeper into both ends. They're moving into Vietnam and China. They're also moving into Africa deeper and deeper. China is a major funder and industrial support system for many African countries. And as they move in, and particularly into the rainforests, they push roads in to get wood. Those roads are used by poachers, and the ivory flows out along those streams. Now, what's happening is that those networks are getting increasingly professionalized. They are interfering with government systems. It's moving into narcotics, it's moving into weapons. Minerals are starting to flow out on the same routes. Coltan is very important for your cell phone. Human trafficking, money laundering, there's a whole range of issues. And another thing I just want to look at very briefly is there's an organization called CITES. It's a UN organization that regulates trade of wildlife. CITES is being corrupted. I could buy for $5,000 an illegal CITES permit. I could export 20 elephants on it. Dealers are perverting the entire CITES system. And there are a whole range of scams. There's a sea scam. Animals are registered according to their rarity. Appendix 1 is they may not be traded, they have to be protected. Appendix 2 is that they are captive bred and so they can be traded. So wild animals are being laundered as captive bred. There's the Z scam, which is if you send an animal to a zoo, it's considered to be for science. Zoos are buying and reselling animals. They're perverting the whole process. So elephants particularly is I've just done a book on elephants called The Last Elephants. It's a sad title. And elephants are now being poached about 3 elephants an hour, 24/7 are being poached in Africa at the moment. So it's a massive problem. We are losing, there's only about 600,000 elephants, down from 3 million 100 years ago. Now, there is a solution to this if governments would be prepared to do that. You hit the supply chains. If you break the supply chains, you break the whole thing. The supply chains between the actual moment of poaching and the movement of that across Africa. If we can stop that and stop the stuff moving out of the ports, we can stop this. But the real problem is the flood of armaments and militias in Africa around the poaching issue. Poaching is supporting the destabilization of countries right across Africa. And that's a major problem. Heroin now, I think, is being paid for by rhino horn. So there's trading, you don't want money involved. Cocaine is coming in here and being paid for with stolen cars from South Africa. Abalone, which is a shellfish, is paying for methamphetamine. So there's a trading system in place, and arms are moving along those same areas. So that's, you know, it can open for discussion later, but that's the kind of stuff that I've been looking at.
Thank you, Dean Pinnock. And I give the floor to Ko-Lin Chin, please. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. My name is Ko-Lin Chin. I am a Cantonese Chinese who was born in Myanmar, or used to be called Burma. So I was raised there. At the age of 16, our family moved back to Taiwan. So I stayed in Taiwan for like about 10 years. And then I came to the United States as a student in 1978. So I'm in the US for about 42 years now. So what I'm going to talk about today is about Chinese organized crime. And when people talk about Chinese organized crime, very often they use the word Chinese mafia. And according to my research over the past 30 years or so, I tend to prefer to differentiate the various Chinese organized crime groups into two major groups. So the first major group are the so-called the Jianghu groups. Jianghu mean rivers and lakes. River and lakes means that these are rootless people, floating people. And this is the first group. And the second groups are the so-called non-Jianghu groups. So the first group, the first category, the Jianghu group, will involve altogether 6 groups, okay? The first group is the triad. So this is organized crime groups based in Hong Kong and Macau. And some of the most well-known triad groups involve the 14K, the Sun Yat, the Woshing Wo. And they normally have thousands of members, and they have a very elaborate structure. And they also involve in a variety of both legal and illegal activities. So that is the first group. The second group involve organized gangs in Taiwan. So groups like the Bamboo United, the Four Seas, the Celestial Alliance, and they also have thousands of members. And they have a very elaborate structure also. And like the Hong Kong triads, they also involve in a variety of both legal and illegal activities. So organized gangs in Taiwan were formed by offspring of mainland Chinese, okay? Chinese who moved to Taiwan from mainland China. And the third group is the Jiaotou group. The Jiaotou groups are the local Taiwanese crime groups. And they tend to be smaller in size. They may have like 30 to 40 members, and they mainly involve in gambling, prostitution, and also very active in politics. I believe most of you probably read about the parliament in Taiwan. the legislators, very often involved in a fist fight inside the legislature. And the reason is because many of them belong, they were gangsters. And then the fourth group is the mafia-style gang in China. So the Chinese authorities will not admit that they have mafia. They call organized crime groups in China as mafia-style gang, meaning that they are very serious, but they have not reached the stage of mafia yet. So they always say, oh, we don't have mafia. We only have mafia-like gang. And then these gangs in China tend to be also smaller. They have dozens of people. They have some kind of a structure, and they are involved in gambling, prostitution, and also legal businesses. So China has a very strict definition of mafia-like gang. In order to be considered a mafia-like gang in China, this group has to have stability, has to have structure, has to have economic strength, also use violence. And the most important requirement is that this group has to have a protective umbrella, meaning that these groups are being protected and supported by the authorities. And then after China, here in the United States, we have Chinese towns. And these are community-based organizations, and they normally have thousands of members, but only some of the core members are actively involved in illegal activities. Mainly, they are related to street gangs in Chinatowns across the United States. So after the town, here in the United States, we also have Chinese gangs, like the Ghost Shadows, the Flying Dragons. So these are some of the well-known Chinese gangs, and they tend to have hundreds of members. They are very active in gambling, extortion, and also street violence. So all these 6 groups are what I will call the Jianghu people, and they will be qualified as Chinese organized crime, okay? However, there is also a whole bunch of Chinese crime groups that are not considered as Jianghu, not considered as organized crime. And these groups will involve, for example, those groups that are very active in heroin trafficking. For example, the Wa in the Golden Triangle, the Gokhan in the Golden Triangle, the Mongla group in the Golden Triangle. They are not considered to be Jianghu people. They are not considered to be gangsters. And then there's those groups that are very active in human smuggling, especially in mainland China, in that province called Fujian province. The majority of the illegal immigrants being smuggled into the United States are from Fujian province. The majority of the illegal immigrants in Europe are from the Zhejiang province. So these are the 2 major sending communities in mainland China. And then the third group will be the human traffickers. These are the people who transported Chinese women all over the world to engage in prostitution. And of course, someone just mentioned about Chinese groups that are involved in wildlife trafficking. And most of these groups are based in Yunnan province near the Burmese border. And also Guangzhou is considered to be one of the major markets for smuggled wildlife. And then finally is the counterfeiting. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on a book about counterfeiting of luxury goods in mainland China. And of course, the center of counterfeiting in mainland China is in Guangzhou. So my point is that when we talk about Chinese organized crime, we have to understand that there are 2 major categories, the Jianghu group and the non-Jianghu group. And it is also very important to differentiate that these groups normally, okay, and I use the word normally, do not work together. They are independent. There may be some interaction among these groups, okay? Even between Jianghu people and non-Jianghu people. But very often it is on an ad hoc basis. It is based on a particular criminal endeavor. And then once they accomplish the goal, they parted way. There's no lasting cooperation exists among these various groups. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Professor Alexander Sainchin, and Irina Lopatyuk will translate. Александр Сергеевич, вам слово. Не слышно.
Я на месте, на месте.
Пожалуйста.
Как слышно меня хорошо?
Да, отлично.
Добрый вечер, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Мне очень приятно видеть старых своих знакомых.
I'm so glad to see both my old friends and acquaintances
И крупных ученых в этой области со всех концов мира.
as well as I'm pleased to greet all the grandiose scholars who are here together. Actually, we have collected somehow from different parts of the world.
Не прошло и полгода, как мы вновь с вами встретились для того, чтобы обсудить ту же тему, которую мы обсуждали в апреле-мае.
I should say it's like almost half a year we've managed to group up together and to prolong the discussion that we've started actually May this year.
Если вы не возражаете, уважаемые господа, я ознакомлю вас с некоторыми статистическими позициями Европола о состоянии преступности в Европе и в Украине в период пандемии коронавируса.
And if you don't mind, dear colleagues, I would like to represent certain statistics that actually this information is taken from Europol, and it concerns the picture of the criminal picture both of Europe and Ukrainian realia.
Как мы и предполагали, в связи с тем, что малое число людей выходит на улицы, граждане Европы и Украины перешли в киберпространство, то есть в систему интернет для общения.
Just as we actually managed to foresee previously, I mean like half a year, the majority of people both in Europe and in Ukraine, they actually during the period of lockdown stopped entering the streets and stopped communicating with one another just in person. And on the other hand, they started to communicate just in the internet, I mean, via the socials.
Как всегда, Украина идет номер один в киберпреступности, в сфере подделки и использования ресурсов Украины, мобильности и медицинских препаратах.
So Professor Sainchin is concerned that Ukraine again is like top one country that's involved in cybercrime counterfeiting of, let me say, some medical supplies and the use of these supplies, as well as of illegal trade.
Речь идет о том, что мы с марта объявили карантин, а представители власти вскрыли уже резервные склады и стали торговать масками по всему миру. Везде, кроме Украины.
Well, we should say that actually the lockdown in Ukraine was in March, and meanwhile the other countries were trying to take a certain decision. In Ukraine, the reserve stocks were already closed. They were opened up, and all the medical masks and the other supplies were sold all around the world.
По данным Европола, только за март и июнь этого года преступники в Украине обогатились на более чем $300 миллионов.
According to Europol statistics, the criminal dealing in Ukraine actually became more rich, richer, like for 300,000 millions of dollars.
Были попытки продажи через сети интернет средств защиты и медикаментов от коронавируса.
And we should say that actually via the internet there were lots of attempts found. By attempts, I mean the attempt to sell and to purchase various medical supplies that are designed for coronavirus issues.
В Европе изъяли более 150 тысяч поддельных хирургических масок и препаратов.
In Europe, we should say like сколько тысяч?
Более 150.
More than 150,000 medical supplies like masks were counterfeited and seized from European market.
Даже стали подделывать в Европе, в Украине и в России тоже. Лекарства против малярии, хлорохин. Вот такое простое.
And a special medicine, let me say, against the southern influence or malaria was counterfeited in Ukraine and in Europe as well.
Специалисты Европола прогнозируют дальнейший рост мошенничества в сети интернет-пространства.
The experts of Europol provide us with certain forecasts dedicated to the field of deception and the fraud connected with the sell and purchase processes of medical supplies.
Но мы ожидали, и это случилось. Преступники перезагружают киберпространство, которое ведет к тому, что в интернет-пространстве они распространяют такие ведомости, которые говорят о перезагрузке номеров банковских карточек.
Moreover, cyber criminals in Ukraine as well as in Europe, they are like reloading and downloading the cyber area. How are they doing that? They are posting certain information claiming that banking account numbers are reloaded and changed.
В Украине каждый день под видом перезагрузки банковских карточек мошенники завладевают счетами более 20-50 респондентов.
And again, the reality is as follows. The cyber criminals in Ukraine, they reboot the banking cards. And these fraudsters, like every week, they reboot like from 10 to 50, 100 banking accounts and take money, of course. That's the fraudulent statistics.
С мая по июнь мы в Украине и в Европе фиксировали резкое снижение всех видов преступности, в том числе дорожно-транспортных происшествий.
Dr. Sainchin is concerned that during the period from May to July, we have faced a certain decrease of various types of criminal activities.
Мы с академиком Мальцевым предполагали, что будет пора, когда будет резкий всплеск всех видов преступности.
And Professor Sainchin, together with Dr. Maltsev, actually forecasted a certain tendency that the spike or the outburst of criminal activity will take its place pretty soon.
В Украине и в Европе, по данным Европола, сентябрь был переломным моментом, когда наметилась резкая волна всплеска преступности.
According to information of Europol statistics in Ukraine, the month of September was that very breaking point that made everyone see this outburst of criminal activities.
Пока в августе, в сентябре фиксируется резкий рост количества мелких краж из супермаркетов.
Concerning August and September, lots of, let me say, small small muggling, I mean like supermarket fraudery or supermarket muggling are, let me say, are
а также грабежи,
in Europe. And
да,
what?
а также грабежи в дневное время. Вырывают сумки, телефоны, сережки, все, что поподряд.
Moreover, we see such a tendency that there are lots of robbery just in daytime. You know, like women are walking down the street and in daytime, in sunlight, robsters just grab everything, like handbags, tashens, like earrings, like everything.
Кроме того, кроме этого, в связи с тем, что люди изолированы в условиях быта и стали чаще употреблять алкоголь, намечается всплеск насильственных преступлений в семье и убийств на бытовой почве.
Moreover, we should say that during the lockdown, lots of people are isolated, right? And they're buying more and more alcohol. That's why we can say that actually certain violent crime spree is waiting for us as well.
Да, спасибо. Август-сентябрь, резкий спрос на оружие и боеприпасы.
Moreover, there is one more significant tendency. Concerning August and September, there is a huge demand on weaponry and everything's connected with weapons.
В Европе и в Украине спрос на оружие и боеприпасы возрос на 225%.
Statistics claim that actually both in Europe and Ukraine, the demand for buying weaponry increased up to 220%. That's huge.
Европол, кроме этого, фиксирует резкий всплеск преступности в связи с тем, что из тюрем в Италии, Колумбии, Шри-Ланке и так далее стали выпускать по амнистии заключенных.
Moreover, Europol fixes and represents certain statistics that there are lots of like criminal activities, and this outburst is connected with the fact lots of criminals are just released and set free in Italy, in Sri Lanka, and in the other countries.
Да, спасибо.
Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Ну, пожалуй, наверное, все, Ирочка, да, потому что материалов статистических очень много. Ну,
Вы можете прислать, и их разместят на сайте просто.
Да, они будут на сайте, Костя, спасибо. Страдают, нужно отметить, кроме этого, Ирочка, особо отметьте, что массово закрываются туркомпании по оказанию услуг. Сворачивают авиакомпании по перевозке людей. То есть та мобильность, которая была ранее, хотя бы намечалась частично июль в август, в сентябре резко упала. Стало быть, преступность переместится локально на участки и страны, где проживают граждане.
So, first of all, there are two options. First of all, Professor Sainchin says that there are lots of peculiar statistical data and they will be uploaded on the website, so everyone will have the definite opportunity to see and to face the statistics. And secondly, there is one more tendency we should cover. Likewise, lots of companies like avia companies, like tourism companies, they are just shut down and closed today. And so this is one more reason we are like to face certain criminal outbursts too. I mean, during the local regions where previously there were no such.
Пожалуй, все так крайне статистически, тезисно. Спасибо.
Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sainchin. And you remember that Jim Finckenauer, one of those experts who wanted to make our discussion panel more interactive. So we can start the discussion part. Please, Professor Finckenauer, formulate your question.
Okay, let me ask a question unrelated to what I talked about. I recently read, this is for at least 3 people here have talked about mafias. And I recently read a paper that did a comparison of what the author called 5 mafia groups. And these included Cosa Nostra in Sicily, Cosa Nostra in the United States, the Triads, Yakuza, and the third one was Nangren, how do you pronounce that? Nangren, Professor Nicaso will know this.
Drangheta.
Drangheta?
Drangheta, yes.
Ah, okay. And she compared these 5 groups, and her conclusion was that they are much less powerful now than they were in the past, that they have lost membership, they have lost resources, their influence is much less than what it was before. And I'm just wondering whether you would comment on that and whether you would agree with that. And if so, why do you think that is? Why is it that they're not as strong as they were in the past?
I'm sure that Dr. Nicaso is not agree with you. So, dear Professor Nicaso.
I partially agree in the sense that Cosa Nostra in the United States and Cosa Nostra in Sicily, they have less power compared to the 1970s, 1980s. The reason in the United States is the great efforts made by the FBI to concentrate the fight against the 5 families. And I think Operation Commission was one of the largest operation in dismantling those criminal organizations. The Sicilian Mafia made a big mistake by challenging the state. As you know, in Italy, the fight against the mafia was never a priority in the political agenda. And I think the only times where the mafia, the states really decided to fight back was when Cosa Nostra killed a series of magistrates and practically challenged the authority of the states. Since that moment, since the arrest of Totorina, Salvatore Provenzano, the bosses of the Cosa Nostra in Sicily, Cosa Nostra was unable to rebuild and restructure the commission. And I believe it's too early to write the obituary, but it's not so strong like it used to be. Different situation is related to the 'Ndrangheta. The 'Ndrangheta is a criminal organization on the rise. It's an organization with an annual turnover of 55 billion euros annually. It's well connected. They have a strong connection in practically all continents. Just to give you an example, recently in the port of Salerno, the Italian police have seized 14 tons of amphetamine pills allegedly produced in Syria by the Islamic State of Iraq. And those 84 million tablets of the drug Captagon were intended to fight for the Europe illegal drug market. In another operation that was reported by the Financial Times, international investor bought bonds backed by crime proceeds of the 'Ndrangheta. And this is according to a financial and legal document obtained by the Financial Times. And practically in one case, the bonds were purchased by one of the Europe's largest private banks, the Banca Generale. it was about 1 billion of worth in terms of money. I disagree with the idea that the 'Ndrangheta is an organization with less power compared to the first decade of 2000. Also because in the last few years, they show ability to infiltrate the Liberal Party in Australia. They force a Ministry of Immigration to revoke a deportation order of an important member of the 'Ndrangheta. I went in Africa so many times, and I totally agree with the concern of Don. The 'Ndrangheta at one point was heavily involved in the coltan business, but also in the 80s they use raw diamond from South Africa to purchase narcotics. I'm talking about 1980s. In the 80s, the 'Ndrangheta established a cell in Johannesburg. Also, the Cosa Nostra was able to corrupt the officials in South Africa and Cape Town with the Palazzolo case, an important member of the mafia that moved to South Africa and was able to avoid any kind of Italian police investigation. I think what makes the Italian mafia stronger at this point is the ability to connect themselves with the major criminal organization, in the sense that they are well connected with the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco cartel of a new generation. Actually, they are in some kind of agreement because they are, the Jalisco and the Sinaloa cartel are producing, thanks to precursors that they purchase in China, they are able to produce fentanyl. And the fentanyl in Mexico is less, it's invading the US market. The 'Ndrangheta also has a strong connection with the Oficina de Envigado with the Autodefensa Gaitanista, the organization that replaced the FARC in Colombia. So they purchase narcotics at a very low cost, 1,000 euros per kilo. But also they have a strong connection with the major features in Bolivia and with some members of the former Sendero Luminoso in Peru. They are all over the place in Europe. And my concern is that, and you raised a good point, Jim, before, the idea that the United States is focused on racism, but and they pay less attention to organized crime and other activity. It's what happened in Europe, where the major concern now is illegal immigrants, and nobody really care about the amount of money that move across Europe and be invested in laundry through banks. I conducted a study analyzing all the police investigation in Europe and United States related to money laundering, and I realized that in an overwhelming majority of cases, the money enter into the legal economy through banks. And so the point is, imagine an organization with the 55 billion euros of turnover, an annual turnover. And they don't invest in Calabria. Calabria is the poorest region of Europe, but the home of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. So they invest money everywhere, and nobody is really say anything, with the exception of sometimes they arrested some politician here and there. I remember the arrest of the Ministry Minister of Environmental in Bulgaria, but they discovered that the Ndrangheta was send illegal waste, toxic material in Bulgaria for so long, and just because they had some sanitary issue, finally discovered that there was corruption between local authorities there. But I can name it: Cyprus, Austria, Liechtenstein, United Kingdom, and the City of London. They don't have any interest to fight organized crime. And for that reason, I firmly believe that in some way nobody is really care where the money comes from. The important time to have cash and to have money regardless of the source, and they accepted those money everywhere. The United States that has a stringent legislation, they have some areas like the Delaware that allow some kind of dark operation, and it's a place where the Ndrangheta has its own brokers. And let's don't mention the Eastern European, which is now a land of opportunity, and unfortunately there is nothing that we can do. On one side we have criminals that benefit from globalization. On the other side, we do have law enforcement legislation restrained by the idea of sovereignty, jurisdiction, territorials, and differences. And I think we will be always, they will be always a step forward, because there is no political will in the fight against money laundering, unless they don't use violence. If they will move, they will keep a low profile, they will avoid violence. I think the money that they generate will enter easier in the legal system in the year to come.
Thank you, dear Professor Nicaso, and also dear Professor Finckenauer. As I understand, you was interested the vision of your colleagues about Black Lives Matters in US.
Well, yeah, not just the Black Lives Matter, this whole issue as to how what has been going on in the U.S. for the last 4 months has been perceived in the rest of the world. I mean, what do people see this as, or what are they thinking about this?
Okay, as I know, Dr. Maltsev is planning to write a book about such phenomena as Black Lives Matters. And Dr. Maltsev, please, you have an opportunity to comment and maybe to talk about your new book about BLM. Yeah.
Спасибо огромное, Константин Владимирович, что вы мне дали слово, как всегда, в своем репертуаре.
Thank you, Konstantina, for giving me the floor. You are like in your style, as usual.
I just announced your new book. Я просто анонсировал вашу новую книгу.
Значит, вы знаете, когда речь идет о таких явлениях, которые сегодня происходят в Соединенных Штатах Америки,
where we are speaking about tendencies that are taking place now in the US,
я всегда удивляюсь.
I'm always surprised, and I'm speaking about things like Black Lives Matter and other events.
Ну, по-моему, должно быть понятно, что происходит.
I think it's quite obvious what is actually going on in the US right now.
То есть этот конфликт политический.
It is about a political conflict in its essence.
То есть это не криминальный конфликт.
It's not even a criminal conflict.
То есть это конфликт двух группировок в США власти.
It's about conflicting for power in the US between two power structures.
И у каждой стороны всегда существуют сильные и слабые стороны.
And each side, as always, they all have their strong sides and weak ones.
Одна сторона считает своей сильной стороной средства массовой информации и ложь.
And one of the sides, which is in the war with another, it considers to be its strong qualities, the mass media influence and lying, deceiving people.
Вторая сторона как бы считает, что как бы они прекрасно умеют организовывать протесты и революции.
And another side thinks that it is very capable of organizing protests and riots.
То есть Соединенные Штаты Америки организовывали эти протесты и революции, Госдепартамент организовывал по всему миру.
So U.S. Department of State have been organizing these riots and revolutions all over the world.
Да. Так они боролись с тиранами и вот злодеями, которые мешают американцам заниматься бизнесом.
That was one of the strategies to deal with tyrants in different parts of the world that are making hard for U.S. businesses to continue their activities.
Но пришло время попробовать Соединенным Штатам, что это такое на собственном народе.
But it came, the situation now is that now it's time for the U.S. to experience what it looks like.
Да. Дело в том, что, еще раз повторяю, то оружие, которое в руках определенных людей, какое у них есть, то они используют в борьбе за власть.
So, I mean, obviously, when people fight for power, they use the weapon that is available to them.
Я не знаю, что думают по этому поводу люди, живущие в США.
I don't know what's the perspective of people that are living in the US on this.
Да, но навести порядок в Соединенных Штатах Америки это совершенно легко сделать.
But bringing an order in the US is not that formidable.
Дело в том, что, как сказал профессор Никасо, как не нужно бороться с деньгами, с отмыванием денег на политическом уровне.
As Professor Antonio just noted that it is inconsequential to fight money laundering on the governmental level. I mean, there are things that you just do not fight with.
Вот точно так же не нужен порядок перед выборами в Соединенных Штатах Америки.
So this is the same thing applies that you don't have to have an order before the elections in the US.
Когда нынешний президент Соединенных Штатов Америки Дональд Трамп пришел к власти,
When Donald Trump came to power,
то есть демократы не согласились с этими выборами ни психологически, ни морально, ни ментально, никак.
Democrats were not in content with the outcome of elections on all level. I mean, just by their attitude, morale, I mean, psychologically, they didn't, I mean, they were not in content.
С первых же дней правления нового президента Соединенных Штатов Америки возникла война между республиканцами и демократами.
And from the first day of Donald Trump's being in the president's office, the Democrats and Republicans, they started openly being at war.
И то, что вы видите, это продолжение этой войны.
And what we are observing today, I mean, from outside, is the continuation of that conflict.
И Дональд Трамп считает, что все средства массовой информации в его руках, поэтому он держит Соединенные Штаты под прицелом.
President Trump thinks that since he is in the power of most major medias in the US, that would mean he thinks that he's keeping whole America under the control.
А демократы ему показывают, что ему не помогут как бы ни средства массовой информации, ничего, и они камня на камне лучше от США не оставят, нежели позволят Трампу повторный раз избраться.
In contrast to that, Democrats consider that no, having mass media in your hand is not enough. We better make it chaotic, but we won't allow to be re-elected second time.
То есть то, что вы видите в Соединенных Штатах Америки, это хорошо организованное революционное движение.
So what we see in the US, in my opinion, is a very well organized revolutionary current.
Да, то есть это не просто люди протестуют.
It is not only protesting people.
Там нет никаких протестующих.
It's not about like protests.
Это подготовленные люди, которые подготовлены специально для осуществления массовых беспорядков и актов гражданского неповиновения.
It's about very well specially trained people that are trained to organize this type of massive chaotic events and civil disobedience.
То есть это люди, которые прошли специальную подготовку.
Again, to emphasize, this is about people that have went through the special training and know how to organize these things well.
Это не криминал.
And it's not criminal.
Криминалу чем спокойнее политическая обстановка, тем лучше.
Because if criminals, I mean, organized crime's perspective on this is that the more tranquil and the more calm is the political situation, the better.
Да, чем хуже всем вокруг, тем криминалу лучше.
And the worse I mean, everything is around the batteries for criminal.
А это политика, это не криминал.
And now what we are seeing in the US again, we see a political clash of different powers and not criminal.
Я не знаю, как в Соединенных Штатах Америки разрешены подобного рода формирование и подготовка подобного рода людей.
I don't know how in US they are allowed, the situation has happened that they were allowed to organize and prepare such trained people.
Для меня вообще американская демократия это загадка.
For me personally, the American democracy itself is an enigma.
Я привык к европейской демократии, американская для меня всю жизнь загадка.
I'm used to European democracy, but American, as I've said, is an enigma.
Поэтому мне очень странно, что в Соединенных Штатах Америки никто не понимает, что это может закончиться огромной бедой.
It's quite strange that many people in the US probably they do not understand that this might bring a very, very harsh consequences for the whole country.
Вот что думают люди, которые смотрят на это со стороны.
So this is one of the perspectives of people that are looking at the US from outside.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Dr. Maltsev. And the last question in this discussion part from Don Pinnock. Please, Don Pinnock, formulate your question. You wanted to discuss some question.
I do, but I'm going to jump out of environmental crime. I want to enter the discussion that's happening now. I've just reread Alex de Tocqueville in his travels in America, and he sets up. He says there are two forces. There's the mob on the one side, which is important to get things going, and there's the conservative side that doesn't move and is also a danger. And democracy is a balance between those forces, which is interesting. He's writing before the American Civil War. He predicted almost the American Civil War would happen. But taking that forward, you have the conservative corporate on the one side and the people who are outside that space, which are the mob, but that's not the right way to describe them. They are the disaffected of that process. The question I want to ask is there not perhaps a third leg of democracy which is undermining democracy? We all looking at the criminal element which leaks money and power out all over the place. In South Africa, we are seeing much the same in a different way that you are experiencing, Jim, in America, that we have, we probably have 200 street demonstrations a day in South Africa, and we have a corrupt government system which has been corrupted by corporates on the other side, and we have a criminal element. So in South Africa, there's this play of forces between crime, establishment, and mob. And I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't take de Tocqueville one step further and ask, what is that third leg? And has it something to do with the violation really of democracy using crime, the autocratic process that crime can master, to be a third force in what is a democratic or the collapse of a democratic process worldwide?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please, Jim Finckenauer. Oleg Maltsev, please comment, and after that, Jim Finckenauer. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Я прошу прощения, что я взял слово. Я буквально 3 минуты.
Sorry for, taking up the floor. I'll be very brief for several minutes.
Дорогой Дон Пинок, так было всегда испокон веков.
Dear Don Pinnock, it was always like this in all centuries when you're saying that the crime is like another power force in the democracy.
То есть европейский криминал возник не на пустом месте.
For instance, European criminal, it didn't emerge like from nowhere.
То есть это не бедные, несчастные люди, которые, знаете, не доедали и поэтому взялись за оружие.
So it was not about like poor, for instance, people that just took their arms and weapons and started doing their thing.
То есть криминал — это та структура, та сила, которая была всегда выгодна государству.
So basically, criminality was always that power component, always that structure that was profitable to governments.
И больше скажу, там в Италии и Испании это национальный спорт.
And for instance, in Italy and Spain, we can almost say that this is like a national sport.
Вот, все же, спасибо большое.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Maltsev. Jim?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think this discussion about raises issues about how do we define organized crime? For example, when we traditionally think about organized crime, we talked earlier about mafias and so on, we think about structured organizations that are about making money. They're not really interested in politics, except as it might assist them to make more money. That's not their goal. But now we have these other kinds of organizations, if you will, and I use the term organization loosely because they are very loose in some instances, whose goal is not to make money, whose goal is to use crimes toward other ends. Should they also be included in our definition of organized crime? And does that say, well, what does it suggest about who makes up those groups? Where do they come from? How do we confront them? What should law enforcement be doing and prosecution and so on be doing to deal with these new, some of these groups are called in this country domestic terrorists. Well, you know, that's also not a self-defining label. What is a domestic terrorist who has some kind of political agenda but engages in criminality to achieve that political agenda? Who are they? What are they? How should we classify them?
Yeah, dear Professor Nicaso, yeah, please.
I totally agree with Jim. I think that the greatest problem in understanding organized crime is not with the word crime, but with the word organized. And he's absolutely right. While violence is the backbone, power is the lifeblood of the mafia and other mafia-type criminal organizations. Because if we go back in history, we clearly, and that's what the Dr. Maltsev underlined before, it's a criminal gangs or criminal organization have not arisen as a result of a struggle between the rich and the poor, or the strong versus the rich as the legend they spin about themselves and would like us to believe, but rather as opportunism by a small group of wrongdoers to benefit themselves. When I was listening the Dr. Ko-Lin Chin at one point, he mentioned that the triads need, some criminal organization need this kind of protective umbrella. My 40 plus years of study of the Italian mafia criminal organization, I always realized that there was not a protective umbrella, but there was a kind of trend to shake themselves, in the sense that they protect one another, in the sense that what we used to perceive as a pathological problem now is more physiological, because you can survive just with the violence. You survive if you have political and financial connection. So those criminal organizations, they have gained an incredible amount of social recognition, as well as having spread their tentacles in the political and economic sphere of the society. And this is the problem. The problem is, how can we define organized crime? What is organized crime? It's just the military aspect, the people that use violence, the people that fire guns, or the people well connected that sometimes, like Don underlined earlier, they undermining democracy. The idea that sometimes they are well connected, they use money, the money enter easily in the legal system. Politicians need them and they cannot do without their support. And that is what we are seeing today. It's more about a kind of a political system. Because I remember when the Italian encyclopedia Treccani, the largest in Italy, asked me to write the entry of organized crime. One of the aspects that I emphasize in the entry was that there can be corruption without mafia, but there is no mafia without corruption. So mafia and corruption are two sides of the same coin. And this is the major issue today. The idea that we are not able to understand that the mafia's criminal organization were able to combine tradition and innovation, but they are a power system today, capable to corrupt and capable to infiltrate institution, undermine the democracy. That's what the mafia is all about.
Thank you, Dr. Nicaso. Maybe Ko-Lin Chin, you want to add something?
I believe my colleague Jim Finckenauer used to emphasize the concept of organized crime versus crime that is organized. So it is very important that when we talk about transnational organized crime, we have to understand whether these groups are real organized crime groups or groups that are involved in crime that is organized. So when I talk about the Chinese groups, I mentioned to you that there are two major groups. The first major groups are the Jianghu people, the Jianghu groups. These groups, like the Triad, the organized gang, the Jiao Tou, the mafia-style gang, the Tong, and the street gangs, those 6 groups will be considered as real organized crime groups, Chinese organized crime groups. And when we move to a variety of transnational criminal organizations, like the people who are involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, counterfeiting, wildlife trafficking, these groups are not Jianghu groups. These are not organized crime groups. These are groups just involved in crime that is organized. And Jim and I normally will differentiate that, you know, organized crime groups, they use violence, they have a reputation for violence, they have a structure, they have territory, they have names, they have longevity, and they're also able to corrupt government officials. When you move to those non-organized crime groups, groups that are involved in all kinds of transnational criminal activities, you don't see violence, you don't see corruption, you don't see organization, you don't see structure, you don't see name, you don't see territories. So it is very important that we do not confuse these two groups and assume that they are the same or assume that they work together. Because I study heroin trafficking, methamphetamine, human trafficking, human smuggling, counterfeiting. Once in a while, there may be gangsters involved in it, but the majority of the people who are involved in these emerging transnational criminal activities do not belong to those 6 groups that I talk about. So I think it is important that we make that differentiation.
Thank you, Ko-Lin Chin. And as I see, this idea of making discussion panel more interactive is a good idea. Yes, Jim?
No, maybe this is has to do with...
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Nicaso?
What you just say probably has to do with the distinction you make among a criminal organization in China or outside of China, in Hong Kong, but not necessarily what I was talking about. I was talking about criminal organizations such as the Ndrangheta. I was talking about different criminal organization, criminal organization capable to corrupt and capable to use violence, to combine violence and corruption. I was talking about the Ndrangheta type or Ndrangheta-like criminal organization.
Right.
I totally agree that there is a distinction that we should make. Otherwise, conventional crime and organized crime would be all together. And I try to make a distinction between mafia and mafia-like criminal organization and a crime that is organized. I totally agree that it's totally different. Names, tradition, myths, rituals, symbols, and so many things that characterize the mafia-type criminal organization.
Yeah, Ko-Lin Chin?
I will agree. I think if you are talking about the Drangheta, definitely this will be considered as a true organized crime groups, not a group that is not crime that is organized, but organized crime. That's for sure.
So such conversation is an effective innovation in our roundtables. And to finish this part of roundtable, I give the floor to Dr. Maltsev.
Я вас немножко повеселю.
I would like to tell an anecdote just to make the situation more.
Я в свое время изучал русскую криминальную традицию в одном большом городе России.
At one point in my life, I've been investigating Russian criminal tradition in one of the largest cities in Russia.
И в этом я не просто изучал ее именно в этом городе, потому что в этом городе считалось, что это самая сильная организованная преступность, которая существует на постсоветском пространстве.
And I've been studying Russian organized crime, I mean, in that city because it was considered to be the most powerful place where it exists on post-Soviet Union.
И я был свидетелем интервью, в общем-то, которое вошло потом в фильм, который сняли центральные телеканалы России.
And I saw an interview which was then broadcasted by central TV channels in Russia.
Где журналисты брали интервью у начальника полиции области этой.
So the journalists were interviewing the head of the police of the whole region.
И журналисты задали ему вопрос, знает ли он, что у него в области самая сильная организованная преступность в России.
And the journalist asked, do you happen to know that in your region is the most powerful organized crime of Russia?
И он ответил, что они ему не докладывали, что они организованы.
And the head of police said, well, they didn't report to me that they are organized.
Да, поэтому как бы, в общем-то, в этом вся суть.
And this is the point.
То есть они ему не пришли и не сказали, что они организованы.
They didn't come to him and didn't say that they are organized.
И поэтому он не в курсе, что у него самая сильная организованная преступная группа в России.
And thus, allegedly, he didn't know that in his region there is the most powerful organized crime in Russia.
Они ему не доложили.
They didn't report.
Ему не доложили, да. Поэтому он не знает.
So he doesn't know.
У него все хорошо в городе.
Everything is fine in
И в
the
области
city.
тоже.
And in the region as well.
Я думаю, что ему с этими людьми тоже хорошо.
And I think he is also fine with those people.
Он стал очень обеспеченным человеком.
Because he became a very well-off man.
Поэтому он, в общем-то, как он может их считать организованной преступностью?
So how come he could consider them to be organized crime?
Они просто уважаемые деловые люди.
They are just allegedly very respectable men.
Какая преступность?
So what do they have to do with crime?
Это просто бизнес.
It's just a business.
А что касается, как выглядит организованная преступность,
And as for how organized crime looks like,
я всегда как бы, я уверен, что со мной никто не согласится.
I'm sure that nobody will agree with me on this round table.
Потому что у меня взгляд все-таки как бы специфический на это, на все.
Because I have a very specific perspective on this.
Да. Но если взять бизнес-корпорацию
But if we take a business corporation,
и взять спецслужбу,
and on the other side, if we take special intelligence service,
и соединить их вместе,
and if we combine these two entities,
внутрь вкрутить специфическую религию и субкультуру,
and when we combine, if we also put inside that amalgam like a specific religious philosophy, subculture actually,
и дать команду этой структуре работать,
and if we order that structure to work,
вот вы получите организованную преступность.
we will end up having an organized crime.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Dr. Maltsev. And we can continue. And the second question of the roundtable is, have the prognoses stated in the previous meeting came true? And if yes, in what ways? So I give the floor to Dr. Antonio Nicaso, please.
As I said before, I think that the situation is getting worse compared to what we were able to predict in May, in the sense that many police investigation discovered that Italian major criminal organization, and particularly the 'Ndrangheta, not only in the southern part of Italy, but also in the northern part of Italy, they are heavily involved in the money laundering operations, and also they are organizing themselves to get their hands on the stimulus funds, not only in Italy, but also in Europe. There was a debate after the publication of an article published in a German newspaper, and the concern of that journalist was that Europe should not give money to Italy because the money could end up in the hand of the criminals. And I disagree with that statement because the dangers of putting the hand on the stimulus fund is not an Italian concern or a concern that it's related only to Italy, but it's related to all major countries in Europe. Because if I want to study the 'Ndrangheta, I could easily move it to Germany, where the presence of 'Ndrangheta clans is overwhelming. It's practically no land. If I want to study the 'Ndrangheta, I can easily move it to the city of London. If I want to understand what's going on in the Eastern Europe, I can clearly move in Bulgaria or in Hungary or in Czech Republic or in Russia, where the 'Ndrangheta at the present time is investing money in the oil business. At one point, they were purchased stock for the Gazprom, and so I was a speaker on a conference organized by the Italian government a few weeks ago about the concern raised by this the possibility of investing criminal asset in the legal economy. It's a major concern, and it's a concern that is raising from all political level. Just to give you some indication, in the mid-90s in Italy, there was an historical shift in the relationship between politics and mobsters. Until the 1992, 1995, at the time of the Christian Democrat Party, at the time of what the Italy called the First Republic, the mobsters seek the assistance and the support of politicians. Politicians were in charge. In the police investigation, and I was able to analyze all of them since 1995 to 2020, I think I saw only one case out of 50, 60, where a mobster in some way asked for the assistance of politicians. In all the other cases were politicians that seek the support of mobsters. And this is because practically they control votes not only in the southern part of Italy, but also in the northern part of Italy. They are money, they invest money, they control the labor force in some areas, they control sectors of the economies, and practically in many regions of Italy, police was able to uncover this link between the 'Ndrangheta and politicians at all levels. With one interesting point, the sense that in a region like Piedmont, in the area where Turin is located, they supported the candidate from the center left. In a region like Lombardy, where Milano is located, they supported candidates from the center right. So at the end, they showed it never had a kind of ideology. Their ideology is power. And they would try to make any kind of compromise. And that's what happened. What happened today, where banks are accepting their money, where stock markets is accepting their money, politicians looking for their political support, professionals of any kinds put themselves available to those individuals. And I think sometimes I see some strange strategies that try to divert the attention from the real problem to problems that sometimes created by media, at least in Italy, to avoid the focus on what is the major issue of Italy, mafia and corruption. And they come out with many other issue and topics that there is, because there is no political will to sit down around the table and focus on what they have to do to solve this problem. You have to consider that the mafia and the 'Ndrangheta, the Camorra, date back centuries. We have first traces of this organization in the first half of 1800s, and they were able to survive all kind of situation and manage to remain strong and powerful. And I think if Italy don't acknowledge that the real problem is corruption and organized crime, and uncover and don't only focus on the criminal element, but try to fight the political and financial connection, they will never be able to get rid of this problem. The idea to focus only on organized crime and not on corruption, the idea not to looking about the political and financial connection of those criminal organizations, it's one of the major problem in the strategy to combat organized crime, not only in Italy, but in the rest of the world. And I'm talking about 'Ndrangheta because 'Ndrangheta is an organization with international ramification, and it's a kind of a power system capable to reproduce this network of trust everywhere. It's nothing to do, because the 'Ndrangheta is not a way of thinking, but it's a way of doing. And if they are able to reproduce this network of trust in any other part, they are able to establish other groups and other branches of the organization outside of the homeland, which is Calabria.
Thank you, Antonio. And I give the floor to Dr. Maltsev.
Спасибо, что дали слово.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
Что касается прогнозов, которые мы сделали в прошлый раз, как бы мне бы хотелось сделать несколько аналитических заметок, я бы сказал так.
As for the predictions that we made on PAIL conference, I would like to make several analytical comments.
Ну, что касается Украины, профессор Sainchin, он рассказал, что у нас здесь происходит, но на самом деле у нас здесь самый лучший карантин в мире.
When it comes to situation in Ukraine, Professor Sainchin already told what is going on in here. But in fact, when it comes to quarantine, it's like the best quarantine in the world.
Я уверен, что вы хотели бы такой карантин у себя.
I'm sure that everybody would desire for such a quarantine in their places.
Да, то есть по сути у нас ничего не изменилось.
I mean, in a nutshell, nothing really changed in here.
Но тогда, когда мы с вами разговаривали, наше правительство собиралось устраивать тот карантин, который в Европе.
But when we were meeting in May, the government in Ukraine was planning to organize the quarantine as it was implemented in many European countries.
Да, и как только они попытались это сделать, здесь волна преступности началась.
And as soon as they attempted to imitate other European states, the waves of criminality just started appearing every single day.
Я не знаю, как в Европе, потому что я только с Хорватии вернулся, и про нее сейчас поговорим тоже.
I don't know how in whole Europe currently. I was just in Croatia recently, but not in other countries.
Но на Украине карантин – это катализатор преступности.
But I should say that in Ukraine, the quarantine measure itself, the strict quarantine, is a catalysator for criminalization.
То есть, вы же прекрасно понимаете, что такое попытка устанавливать карантин.
I mean, certainly all people understand what the attempt to impose a strict quarantine looks like.
То есть это, по сути, сразу обеднение людей.
Basically, it's making people poor in a single second.
И обеднение криминалов в начале.
And in the first place, they are trying to diminish the well-off of criminality.
Не той организованной преступности, про которую мы говорим.
And certainly, it doesn't relate to the organized crime that we were speaking before. It relates to other type of.
Нижнего уровня криминала.
I'm speaking about the lower levels of crime.
Да. А обедневший криминал идет еще на более жесткие преступления, чем он шел до этого.
And the lower level of criminality, it starts being even more aggressive in the way it conducts its criminal activities to compensate for the losses they.
И даже те люди, которые вообще не были склонны к криминалу какому-то.
So what happens that people that were not even inclined to any kind of criminal activities,
когда у них кончатся деньги и запасы,
when they run out of their money and things that they saved up,
то они могут пойти и на преступления.
They are potential people that might start committing crimes.
Сначала на мелкое.
First, it would be, of course, peculiar, I mean, small crimes.
Потом больше, больше.
Then it would be bigger and bigger.
Да, то есть карантин – это катализатор преступности.
So basically, again, as I've said, quarantine is a catalysator of criminalization.
Слава Богу, что на Украине это быстро поняли и все исчезло.
So thank God in Ukraine they understood it quite quickly and they softened the measures.
Ну, кроме внешних ограничений.
Except external limits that were logical.
Я имею в виду перед самолетов там и всего остального.
Which is related to transportation, like airplanes and etc.
Да. Я только что вернулся из Хорватии.
I just came from Croatia.
Я вот думаю, что хорватский опыт, должен быть, для Европы главным.
And I think the example of Croatia should be the main one in Europe.
Да, то есть я в Хорватии пробыл 2 недели.
So I was there for 2 weeks.
С научным визитом.
In the expedition.
Да, и могу отметить очень грамотную работу хорватских полицейских.
And I should note well-organized and very smart work of Croatian police forces.
Никакого карантина нет.
There was no quarantine as such that would impose and make you feel uncomfortable.
Он как бы есть,
It is there,
но его нет.
but it's not.
Да, то есть как бы никто никого не дергает с этим карантином, как бы все, если и делают какие-то замечания, то только в информационном порядке.
Even if people are basically said about different restrictions, this is done in a recommendational manner, in the way it doesn't escalate any conflicts.
И обратите внимание, Хорватия в зеленой зоне.
And please pay attention that Croatia in the green zone.
Никакого роста вируса у них нет.
The virus is not like spreading.
Потому что они поступили очень грамотно.
Because their actions were smart.
То есть они сказали, сделали у себя там анализ на коронавирус, приехали, показали нам на границе и занимайтесь чем хотите.
Because once you take the coronavirus test, you're analyzed, you just show them, and then you are free to conduct your activity as you want.
То есть на границе отдал справку о тесте и пошел.
So it's enough for them to provide the test analysis.
Больше вас никто ни о чем не спрашивает.
Nobody would ask you and create hardships for you.
Да, то есть как бы и соответственно люди с коронавирусом не прилетают в Хорватию.
And certainly people that are infected with coronavirus, they do not come there.
Да, и соответственно у них там нет никаких проблем с карантином.
And they don't have problems with quarantine.
Зачем Европа устроила вот этот карантин у себя?
And why most European countries created the quarantine in their countries?
Я, например, не могу сказать ничего про Италию, потому что я там 6 месяцев не был, и о чем глубоко сожалею.
I cannot speak for Italy because I haven't been there for half a year, and it's very unfortunate for me that I was not able to.
Но я не думаю, что итальянцам хорошо от того, что у них там карантин.
But I don't think that Italians are happy of what is going on in there with the quarantine measures.
Да, я не думаю, что итальянцы сильно разбогатели от карантина.
I don't think that Italians gained a lot of money because of these restrictions.
Да, и как бы у меня очень много друзей в Италии, и все они говорят только об одном: зачем это нужно?
And friends of mine that are in Italy, they all say that. What is going on? Why we have all this? Why do we need
То есть, по сути, вот эта глупая европейская политика повторять друг за другом карантины.
So basically, this not smart logic of European countries to imitate each other when it comes to restrictions and quarantines.
На политическом уровне.
On the political level, certainly.
Она просто катализатор условий для работы и оргпреступности.
It just escalates the conditions for organized crime work.
И как бы по сути обеднения своих граждан.
And making their own people poor and poor.
И сколько ученых не пишут: прекратите этими глупостями заниматься, нужно как бы действовать совершенно иначе. Прекратите этот карантин, ни одно правительство не хочет его прекращать по причине того, что, вероятно, он ему зачем-то нужен.
And no matter how many scholars produce their works and explain things about quarantine, that things should be done in a different way, countries do not take that into consideration, and probably states do need this long quarantines.
И по сути своей, как бы, то, что говорят, что выделяются огромные деньги для рестартинга экономики, как бы.
And the fact that huge stimulus funds are provided to restart the economy.
Вероятно, это и нравится этим государствам, что есть возможность осваивать какие-то бюджеты.
Probably this is one of the alluring points for states, so that they have these funds that they can use.
Да, но как бы раз есть бюджет, значит его можно делить.
And as we always know, if the funds are there for governments, then there's something to divide.
А так как они сами его поделить не могут, для этого же нужны специальные как бы, способы сокрытия этих преступлений.
And since nobody would allow them to divide the money, just out of the blue, they need a certain mechanism to cover these machinations,
да, то нужно пригласить деловых партнеров,
then they might invite like business partners
да, которые называются организованной преступностью,
that are termed organized crime,
которые умеют это хорошо делать,
that know how to do it well,
которые отмоют, как у нас говорят, эти деньги лучше, чем в итальянской химчистке.
that would launder the money, as it says, it is said in Russian, better than in an Italian dry cleaner.
Да, поэтому как бы по сути своей, если говорить про Соединенные Штаты Америки,
And if to speak about United States,
то там же, ну, она как бы устроена с штатами,
since there are so many states with their own federal regulations,
и в каждом штате свои законы и свои привилегии.
and they would have their own privileges, own laws and restrictions.
И как бы там, в общем-то, я так понимаю, тоже всем нравится коронавирус.
I guess in there people are also fond of, in quotation marks, of having the.
Какой же американец не любит деньги?
So there's no American that do not like money.
А здесь деньги из воздуха.
And in here it's almost like making money out of air.
Ну, есть коронавирус, много денег для того, чтобы бороться с коронавирусом.
So when there is the coronavirus, there's a lot of money to combat coronavirus.
Мой знакомый один в США как бы говорит, что они еще как-то глупо, ну, крадут деньги на коронавирусе в США.
And my acquaintance from America, he says that they are stealing money in America in a very idiotic manner.
Да, у него много других было идей, как это можно было бы сделать, он со мной поделился.
And he came up with other ideas of how this could have been implemented.
Да, поэтому как бы вы же прекрасно понимаете, что власти как бы этот карантин выгоден.
And certainly it's obvious that for leaders of the states, the quarantine is something beneficial, something advantageous for them.
То есть, как бы, по сути, если взять Украину, то официальное украинское правительство опубликовало заявление, что они освоили только 35% бюджета, выделенного на то, чтобы бороться с коронавирусом. То есть, соответственно, нужно еще 65% освоить, а для этого должен, вот, чтобы был коронавирус.
For instance, if we speak about Ukraine, they officially stated that they have used only 35% of funds that was allocated to fight coronavirus, which would mean that they need to spend 65% and they would need to prolong the quarantine.
То есть в результате мы как бы видим, что по сути своей то, что случилось в Европе, как бы это какая-то финансовая махинация, а не эпидемия.
As a result, in Europe especially, it seems that it is not that much about epidemics, but about like financial machination that took place.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Maltsev and Jim Finckenauer. You can continue our roundtable.
Well, thank you very much. I guess speaking as one of those Americans who love money, going back to the May conference, one of the things that was talked about was an increase in violent crimes that was seeming to occur in certain American cities, particularly murders and aggravated assaults and so on. Well, that pattern has certainly continued. I think, as was mentioned in yesterday's session by the former FBI person, statistics show significant increases in murders and aggravated assaults in many major American cities. There's also continued to be increases, and this was mentioned in May as well, in domestic violence cases. Now, I don't know at this point of any empirical research that's been done to explain why those things might be occurring. But if I were to sit here as a criminologist and throw out some hypotheses, certainly one of them is, won't come as a surprise to anybody listening, that we have a lot of guns in the United States. And guns are certainly related to murders and violent assaults and so on. The other thing that's happened is people have lost their jobs. You lose your job, on the one hand, you got no income. On the other hand, you got a lot of free time. On the third hand, you got a lot of time where you're at home, perhaps with your significant other, whoever that is, and a lot of togetherness. And then you have drinking that gets combined into that process, and all of a sudden you see resorts to violence. People on the street or in the home, and they're resentful. They don't like their situation. They act out. They're drinking, etc. As I mentioned, and so you see these increases in violence. This is a very different pattern, because for many years, probably 20 years or so, crime was basically declining in major cities in the US, particularly violent crimes. And now it's had this upturn over the last 6, 7, 8 months. Largely, it seems, as a consequence of the impact of the pandemic. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So now I give the floor to Don Pinnock. Please, you can continue our roundtable.
Thank you very much. South Africa locked down hard. They locked down early. You couldn't buy alcohol. You couldn't buy cigarettes. You could go to the shops to get your food, and that was it. Crime went down spectacularly. The government has a lot of credibility. People were very obedient. South Africans listened to the president, did what he told them. So everybody was very pleased with themselves. Right now, we're pretty much out of COVID. Lockdown's over. Quarantine is at its lowest possible. There's just a limitation on very large numbers of people. And COVID is on the way out, summer's coming. The side effect, though, is two things. A lot of people lost their jobs. And when lockdown eased, street crime went up. Housebreaking, mugging, all that kind of stuff is on the rise. But the other thing that became obvious is that billions of dollars were put forward for COVID relief and for the purchase of equipment. And it was stolen. It was largely stolen by government and people in corporates. So the respect for the government has gone down, and the level of street crime has definitely gone up. And just a last thing, and it's nothing to do with South Africa, because of zoonotic diseases clearly were the cause of COVID-19. There's been a push against the purchase and use of wildlife in medical and in food. And it has had an effect on poaching. It didn't have an immediate effect because I think the poachers didn't realize that it was being blocked at the other end. Now, what we don't know is if that's going to return. If the prevention of the consumption of wildlife continues mainly in Asia, it's going to have an effect in Africa, positive effect. It's going to take a while for the local poachers to wake up to the fact that they're not getting paid because nobody wants their stuff. My concern is, of course, that when it's all over, it's all over. And then we go back to the wet markets, we go back to poaching. So that's me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Don Pinnock. Ko-Lin Chin, please, you can continue.
Thank you. I talked to high-ranking police officers in China a lot. And whenever I ask them of the question, which group is the most powerful organized crime group in your city, they always say, we are. So the police department, they always, their point is that, look, we are in charge. We are the most powerful group in China. So if we are happy, we will allow certain organized crime groups to survive. And if we are not happy, we can go out tomorrow and just wipe them out, just like this. So to answer your question, the second question about what has changed after the pandemic, my answer is it's not the pandemic, it's who is in charge. That is the most important. And after Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, organized crime in China has fundamentally changed. And the reason is because Xi Jinping wants to tightly control the Chinese society now. So all the fun, all the prostitution, the drinking, the dining, and the whining, the gambling, everything is now dramatically reduced. So as a result of that, it definitely have an impact on these organized crime groups. For example, back to Jim first at the very beginning, as when he said whether the triads, they are in decline, and the answer is definitely yes, because after Hong Kong was returned to mainland China in 1997, Macau was returned to China in 1999. The triad groups in Hong Kong and Macau, they quiet a lot. They try to, maintain a very low profile. And the reason is because they don't want to antagonize Beijing. Because if they do, they know that, they will have to pay the price. So if you look at the level of activities in China, take prostitution, for example. Before Xi Jinping came to power, when you go to China and check into a 5-star hotel, you will be surprised that there may be that there is maybe 5 brothels within the hotel. But nowadays it's being completely wiped out. So the answer is that right now in China, all kinds of organized crime activities have dramatically reduced, and especially after the pandemic, because for example, the people that I'm studying, those who are involved in counterfeiting, after the pandemic, all the demands have dramatically reduced, and as a result, they are all in very bad shape. But there is one group, however, that is still very active and also able to expand their illegal activities, and that is the Wa group in the Golden Triangle. Shifting from opium to heroin to methamphetamine, and now into fentanyl and other kinds of emerging drugs. And the reason is because they are not part of China, they are in Myanmar. So as a result, the pandemic has no impact whatsoever on their drug trafficking business. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Alexander Sainchin, please. Alexander Sergeyevich, who is this? We'll be waiting about 5 or 10 seconds. Okay. Now, let's talk about your impressions about this roundtable. Dear Antonio, tell me please, what do you think about such formats of roundtables? Maybe you have some wishes to the future events. Summarize up this roundtable, please.
I always like the opportunity to share my opinion with distinguished guests, and I believe that this is an opportunity of discussing topics such as organized crime. So I look forward for new initiative organized by Dr. Maltsev, and I really enjoy the opportunity to discuss with you about the topic of great concern such as organized crime.
Thank you. Jim Finckenauer, what do you think about today's roundtable?
Well, obviously, I think that the whole idea of the interaction and the opportunity for people to engage an issue and have different perspectives around the same issue is a good direction, because what it does is, instead of having many sort of unconnected issues. Not that the issues are not important, but they're essentially unconnected, and they fall into little silos. This way, there's a linkage. The notion, for example, of Don Pinnock's idea of referring back to de Tocqueville's notion of the mob led me to think about the idea of the mob has become differentiated. There's not a mob, there are multiple aspects of this mob, some of which have criminal enterprises. So, but he probably wasn't intending to talk about that initially, but that came out of this interaction, and I think that kind of spontaneity and ability to go back and forth is a very good thing to do. I like that.
Thank you, Jim. Don Pinnock.
What this has taught me is that we get very involved in Africa, talking about the issues of Africa. It's very interesting to be in a round table with people who are focused on Europe and the United States and the East, and not on Africa. The degree to which Africa is not part of your lives at all is interesting to me. But it's fascinating to see the parallels that happening. I really appreciate that opportunity, and I will, if I'm part of these, I will drag you into Africa. I promise, because it's important. Your views here. Organized crime is linked right across the planet. What really concerns me is is not so much the groups, but the networks and the avenues by which organized crime happens. And look, I'm looking at poaching because of those avenues, because of those networks. And that goes into your areas, absolutely. So this is why these discussions are really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Don Pinnock. Ko-Lin Chin, it is your first appearance on the conferences and roundtables organized by European Academy of Science of Ukraine. So your impressions and what do you think about such formats of roundtables?
Oh, thank you. I enjoy it a lot. This is a very good opportunity for me to able to talk to experts from all over the world, and you don't even have to go out of your house. So this is just incredible, because normally when you go to a conference involving people from all over the world, you have to travel. I mean, you have to fly 20 hours, 30 hours, and then you have to check into the hotel. But like right now, we can just stay home and involve in such very interesting conversation. But what I would like to emphasize is the fact that, instead of paying attention to only those so-called quote unquote traditional organized crime groups like the Italian mafia, the Yakuza, the Triads, the Russian mafia, we probably have to pay more attention to those non-traditional organized crime groups, those groups that are more like a business, more like a legitimate business, that are taking advantage of globalization, interconnectedness, and make it very difficult to penetrate, because they are just like any other legitimate business. For example, if you take wildlife trafficking, for example, all these people that are involved in it, they are not gangsters. They are not really people, but they are also involved in a variety of legitimate business, and it is very difficult to differentiate them. So I think it will be important to pay more attention to those, otherwise legitimate business and their ability to involve in such lucrative, transnational criminal activities.
Thank you. Yesterday I called Dr. Maltsev as a father of such meetings, and it's not a joke. because it's a great work and it's a work of organizing committee. So I repeat it today. Dr. Maltsev, your closing speech, please.
Уважаемые господа,
Dear colleagues,
мне очень радостно и приятно, что мы имеем возможность собираться хотя бы так.
I'm very happy and glad that at least we have an opportunity to gather together at least via web.
И, как бы, конечно, я не сторонник интернета, я люблю личное общение.
Certainly, I really dislike internet communications. I prefer more personal communications.
Да, и поэтому, как бы, ничто не заменит нашего личного общения, личных встреч. Как бы.
Because, I mean, you can never compensate and make up by internet the personal meeting. This is something more.
Но интернет нам позволяет общаться оперативно на дистанции, за что ему, конечно, огромное спасибо.
However, thanks to web, at least we can communicate very quickly on the distance.
Да, и поэтому, безусловно, когда закончится, а мы будем надеяться, что это закончится как можно быстрее,
And hopefully this pandemic situation globally will end soon.
у нас есть как бы идея о создании этих же круглых столов уже физически.
And we have an idea to organize these round tables physically.
Да, то есть чтобы мы могли встречаться за одним круглым столом лично.
So we can gather together on one round table in person.
Да, и поэтому как бы мы к этой цели будем стремиться.
And we will be aspiring towards that goal.
И чтобы эти столы стали традиционными.
And we will make our best so that these round tables become a tradition.
Потому что ту профессию, которую мы с вами выбрали, она очень редкая в мире.
Because the profession that we all choose here on the round table, I mean, people that are here, it is a very rare profession.
Криминологов очень мало.
There are not many criminologists.
И нам нужно чаще встречаться и чаще работать вместе.
And we should meet more frequently and we should work more frequently together.
Спасибо огромное за внимание. Я, как всегда, как бы, говорю огромное спасибо всем присутствующим, особенно профессору Никасо.
Thank you all for your attention. Thank you all guests that you are here, and especially I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Antonio Nicaso
Что он нашел время в своем плотном графике тоже к нам присоединиться.
for finding a time in his very extremely busy schedule currently and be together with us today.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you all.
Let me thank all the speakers, dear colleagues and experts. The online roundtable on organized crime and criminal traditions is about to be over now. In the course of several weeks, the scientific and organizing committee will prepare the resolution, which is going to be available on the website. And of course, every speaker is going to be notified. So the news on the media coverage of the given conference will be also notified by the organizing committee. So thank you all for your contribution and participation. Thank you. Bye-bye.